Welcome to Cybersecurity Where You Are, the Center for Internet Security's podcast. I'm Sean Atkinson, CISO at CIS.
And I'm Tony Sager, Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist at CIS. Cybersecurity affects us all, whether we're online at home, managing a company, supporting clients, or running a state or local government.
So join us on Wednesdays as we discuss trends and threats, explore security best practices, and interview experts in the industry.
Together, we'll clarify these issues, creating confidence in the connected world. Well, welcome back to the Center for Internet Security's podcast, Cybersecurity Where You Are. It's always a pleasure to explore topics in cybersecurity with the audience here. And as always, we're open to your feedback, your suggestions, and ideas for topics that we can address. And we have a great topic today, one of my favorite. We're going to talk about the CIS critical security controls and all that goes with that. Joined by two members of the team, Valecia Stocchetti. Please, Valecia, you've been here before. Introduce yourself to our audience, please.
Sure. My name is Valecia Stocchetti, Senior Cybersecurity Engineer for CIS. I've been here for about 9 years now. Started out in the Computer Emergency Response Team doing incident response and forensics, and then moved to the controls team ever since then. So I think it's going on 5 years.
Super. And also joining us today is the Director of the Controls, Charity Otwell. Charity, introduce yourself, please.
Hey, thanks. And my name is Charity Otwell, Director of Critical Security Controls here at CIS. I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I get the pleasure of leading the Critical Security Controls team that's responsible for the controls document itself, as well as the supporting ecosystem. Before joining CIS 2.5 years ago, I was in banking for about close to 20 years. So lots of governance, risk, and compliance, which you'll hear me talk about some today, as well as lots of regulatory conversations.
Super. Yeah, welcome to both of you. And one of the most exciting things to me, having been around since before there was a CIS Controls, is that there actually is a team. It was a pretty informal project in its early days with lots of volunteers and not much structure. And you two are part of really the professionalization of the controls as not just a thing, but a worldwide thing, a whole movement of people. So, and that's been, I think, one of the most exciting parts of the activity here, right? And we often talk of the controls. It's not a document; it's a whole set of things. And the goal is not to give you a thing to read, and good luck with that. The goal is to help you achieve the intentions of the document, right? The document is a way to capture the ideas. And so this maturation of the controls and all that goes with it is really, I think, one of the most exciting stories at the Center for Net Security over the last year. So Sharon, get us started on that. What does it mean when we talk about, we use the term a lot, but the term, the ecosystem, the controls ecosystem?
The ecosystem is one of my very favorite things to talk about, and Valecia has been here for much longer than me, so I'm going to give her a chance to talk about it. So I'll kick us off. So the controls ecosystem really is, the controls document itself, but like you said, it's not just about the list, right? It's not just about the controls, it's everything that goes with it, right? So it can be thought of as, the backbone is the controls themselves, but really the ecosystem surrounding it has been growing and maturing throughout the years, right? So I think we're looking at around 115 documents that are in that ecosystem. And just as a former practitioner, I always come back to that constantly of the topic of what I wish I would have known. I've been on the practitioner implementer side for many years before joining CIS. And in banking, of course, we had the FFIEC handbooks on your key topics like information security, governance, business continuity. But those are just handbooks. They do reference frameworks such as CIS, but the user guide on the how-to was lacking. That age-old question of where do I begin is, of course, answered at CIS by using the controls and the implementation groups. But the deeper question to me around how do I implement things like managing a cloud service provider and that shared responsibility of what am I responsible for versus what am I expecting a cloud service provider to be responsible for is answered within that ecosystem. And so that's only one of the many resources available. And what I appreciate most about it is that it puts data in the hands of the practitioner to have conversations around resource requirements for your program, as well as, the value of the prioritized implementation. But I know that Valecia has a lot to say on that too. Tony as well, probably.
Yeah, Valecia, what's your perspective on the ecosystem? I know you've created some of the key parts of it.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy to see the evolution of the controls. So when I came in, it was version 7.1 that that was in production, or not really in production, it was already published. And then we obviously started the groundwork for version 8. And I think that's really kind of the pivotal moment where we really started to kind of increase our content that we were delivering. And at that point, that was kind of, I'm really big on journey and sort of like how we present our content. And that was the point where I was like, all right, we have all this content. We need to organize it now and sort of try to tell our story, but also provide sort of this roadmap for people when they adopt the controls. Because I go to these conferences and they're like, you have great stuff. You have a lot of stuff, but where do I start? Because there's just so much stuff, right? And that was really the point where I worked with our controls coordinator, Robin Renier, and really tried to organize it in a way that made it easy to adopt and follow. And also, for evolution of on our own side of updating our content and making sure that we, nothing slips through the cracks and that we have everything that people need. And it also helps us with, just versioning in general when we go from one version to the next.
Right. Well, that turning point that you referenced, right? We go from a thing to lots of things, and in fact, there are so many things that you have to reframe the story. So what are all these things doing? They're all for a reason, right? And a lot of this was about helping people implement, and that's really the topic we're exploring today: is how do I go from these big ideas, the bringing together the technology, business use of technology, attacker tradecraft, what's going on out there, and how do I bring that together into a picture, but also help people get to that point. And so one of the things I wanted to explore with you, Charity, is we all recognize there's no one size fits all in any of these things, but you've got these giant regulatory requirements, industry requirements you have to deal with. At the same time, you're trying to figure out what to do. But if you leave it at this very high level, then everyone interprets differently, whether it's the adopter, the auditor, the regulator, which has that Wild West feel to it. But if you're too prescriptive, you lock yourself into technology and, this must be the solution for this problem. So our goal has always been to aim for a sweet spot, right? You have to provide enough structure that people know what problem they're trying to solve, what they're trying to do. At the same time, you don't want to lock people in. Tell me about the discussions that you have. How do we get that part of it right? How do we help people with the good intentions of regulation, for example, but not over prescribe, yet be specific enough that they have a sense of, I know what I need to do now?
Right, absolutely. And so this really, going from like a strategy type of discussion into implementation, right, is really drawing from my past experience and really leans heavily on understanding the strategy. To me, that's the first part. What are you trying to accomplish? What are your business objectives that you're trying to achieve? And then clearly defining your implementation expectations in a realistic and achievable way. And I know that that's a mouthful, but it's incredibly important. So whether you're creating the strategy yourself as an IT leader or the information security officer, or you're the one being handed said strategy and are responsible for that execution, the biggest goals to me are around clarity. And I think that you kind of touched on that. We have these big things. We have regulatory compliance that we have to demonstrate. But for an example, the strategy could be to mature your current state cybersecurity program to a level that's maybe set by your organization, regulatory requirements, et cetera. So in this example, I'm using moving from IG1 to IG2. So your execution of that would be to ensure that you have an assessment of where you are currently. You can do that with our controls self-assessment tool or a GRC tool that you already have in place, and then simply use the IG2 safeguards to do so. So it's already outlined for you, and it's meant to be a security roadmap, right? So the other tricks of the trade there would be to understand your business priorities and really set a realistic timeline. So this is intended to be, for the next audit, or, so you would design your timeline according to that, or is it better suited for your company in a phased approach? So that way you don't stumble on too many of these big pillars, right? And examiners like a roadmap. So that's always helped me out.
I think that your point is well taken in that you're implementing a technical program, but you do it in concert with the sort of business calendar, right? These are the things we can afford, the touch points we're going to have to deal with auditors and demonstrate, explain to others what we're doing. And all that has to be factored in to the plan as you pull things together. And those require a different level of understanding of the content, from, again, sort of strategy to the details to to specific choices, and how do I organize, the things that I buy. And a lot of that is driven by, and again, we've tried to address that at CIS. So Valecia, I'm going to ask you, so you are a leader in two of my favorite pieces of content in the ecosystem. I think you know what I'm going to ask you about. One is the Community Defense Model, something that we talked about for quite a bit over a long period of time. And the other is costing, which was one of the most frequent questions. But start with the CDM, sort of what you were trying to accomplish. You don't have to go through it all. It's well documented and available to anybody. But this notion of the defense model, what were you aiming for there?
Yeah, I mean, probably the best thing I can do is explain it in an example. So I remember quite vividly when I was in the MSISAC side, and I was in the boardroom, and there was a bunch of state and locals in the room. And this is back when we actually gathered in person for meetings. And one of the things I said is that I showed a chart. There was, I think it was ransomware and then targeted intrusions. And the targeted intrusions at the time, it was, nation states, and it was lower as far as what we were showing. This is before CDM came out, and ransomware was higher. And the person stood up and said, that's the chart that I need to send to my executives, because they keep chasing things that are not actually a risk for our organization. It's not to say that nation states aren't a risk, right? It's just the fact that for their organization, the threat was different. And so I think that really, I think back to that example, and now what we're doing in the community defense model, where it helps people kind of tease out the details that they need in order to push their security program forward, right? Because they may be chasing something that's not even a risk to them. And so for a mom and pop shop that's not really maybe faced with targeted intrusions, then why would they ever, address those safeguards that deal with that? And so that's sort of where I think CDM comes into play, is they're able to hone in on what actually matters to them. And it also helps, kind of provide clarity that what they're doing actually is defending against something, right? We don't want to implement a security framework and just say, oh, great, I've implemented all these controls, and what do they do, or why are they important? It's not really, it's not really helpful in that.
No, and it's the key to the discussion that Charity was referencing, right? You're at the end of the day, investing in cybersecurity is a business decision, and so you want to, what is the most important problem to be solved, and what will it cost me to get to that point, right? And how do I get support from my management? How do I explain that to an auditor? You may think this, but I have a rationale that says this is the problem I need to care about first. And I think, having a technical basis for that, I think, is incredibly important. And it's something that I think most of the industry has not really caught on to, that it's sort of left to the reader, right? Many of the hard problems in this business we leave to the reader or the poor adopter. And I think that's right. Costing is another one, though, right? That had to be one of the most frequent questions you as a team would get. What's it going to cost me to do whatever? And so, how about just a brief word about the costing work that you've done?
Yeah, that one was a really fun project, very tedious. Okay. And I think
but fun.
Yeah. So for the costing paper, obviously it was very tedious, a lot of work, but it was very rewarding in the end. And I think what it really told us is that you can implement a security program for less money than it costs to recover from an attack, right? And it's not to say that you're never going to get attacked if you do it, this way or whatnot. It's to say that you've done your due diligence to at least upfront help protect your systems, and then hopefully in the end you mitigate that attack or completely avoid it. But the costing is really kind of the other piece of the puzzle, right? Because so many companies face budget issues, and it's very hard sometimes to get that money up front. But if you have data to back that, hey, it won't cost as much as it is if you actually have an attack, then maybe it'll start pushing the envelope to be more proactive rather than reactive.
No, exactly right. And I think that, I grew up in a world where if you treat cybersecurity as wizardry, then I learned the ultimate answer to how much more do I need to spend on security stuff? And the answer is more, because no matter what you fix, there's more, and well, okay, bankrupting your company in the name of better security doesn't sound like a great business strategy to me. I mean, I'm an ex-government guy, but even I can figure that one out. But I think that, again, having more a factual basis, right? That we all share a dream. I'll share it with our audience that someday we'll make decisions in this industry based upon data as opposed to gut feel and wizardry and folklore and habit and marketing hype and all that. And, so I'm really proud of the work that you guys have done in bringing rigor under the hood. But it also, again, it really is about the basis for the conversation that Charity talked about, right? Which is there's lots of decision makers here and they have roles and responsibilities, and we've got to be able to kind of meet the needs of people that not by asking everyone to become a technical expert, but by everyone to play their part in making a sound business decision based upon facts, based upon best available data, and so forth. So Charity, you spend a lot of time thinking about this conversation, the interface between the technical view, the security view, and the management view, right? So and having seen it from the practitioner side and now come to the inside here, what ideas did you help bring as a practitioner? How have you helped shape the controls, the ecosystem, and the content to better support the needs of folks who use our work?
So one of the biggest things that I hope I bring to the table is my background as a practitioner and within governance, and why that is so important. One of the driving principles that I used in my days in banking was that your governance structure should ensure the handshake between IT and corporate governance, which is your board of directors. So even if you're a small company, the governance you have in place should enable those business objectives, right? So of course, the first goal of that would be to understand the business and how those processes would be supported. But what I really love is that version 8.1, which is the latest one I was a part of, right, identifies which safeguards are in support of that governed security function. So these are going to be the guardrails around what's enforced, what manages your cybersecurity program as a whole, and the team probably gets tired of me saying this, but what teeth, if you will, do you have in place? Meaning, what are your policies? The team has done a really great job with policy templates as well. Are they reviewed on a frequent enough basis? Are your governing processes established for things like asset management and data protection, really looking at the process and program as a whole? So I hope I've brought some of that to the table. Another thing about 8.1 is all of those things are called out for you. I think that it's around 30-ish safeguards. And anytime I talk about this, if you're on an older version of controls, have no fear. These safeguards are not new. They've been there previously. We just identify them for you so that you can have those conversations around proper program management and how the program supports the business drivers. So aside from that, hopefully, just my background, like I said, as an implementer, as a former practitioner, and the fact that I've had conversations with regulators and had limited resources that I didn't have with the CIS controls ecosystem, and just the importance of that and shaping that user experience, if you will, to be able to put the right data in their hands, to have the right conversations. I remember days, you talk about your former government days. I had days where, I really didn't know where to go. Like, how do I build out a risk assessment methodology? How do I have conversations around, like Valecia was talking about the cost of cyber defense and really justifying those resources and that budget. So hopefully I'll continue to get to shape the ecosystem for the team, and it's been really great.
And with that, we'll be right back after this quick break. Tony, cloud security is like setting up a new home security system.
You have responsibilities like setting up alarms and locking certain doors.
But unlike a home security system, cloud security doesn't come with a manual.
No, you don't have a definitive guide to what you need to harden in your cloud environments or how.
There's got to be a better way.
Thankfully, there is. CIS hardened images. These virtual machine images come pre-hardened to the CIS benchmarks, providing built-in cloud security and compliance without any guesswork.
CIS hardened images are also available for just cents per compute hour, saving you time and money managing your cloud security posture.
And all while using major cloud service platforms like AWS, Azure, GCP, and OCI.
Cost-effective cloud configurations, CIS hardened images are ready to go when you are.
Spin one up today by visiting cisecurity.org. Yeah, I think that's correct. As I don't know if our audience has seen any of this, but the discussions that we have internally and with our volunteers, there are multiple ways to come up with the original controls document. You could frame it sort of from one dimension or another. You could present it, by technology, by order of events in implementation. You could lump them in all kinds of ways. And so we picked what we thought was the best path that made sense, right, to present it as a whole, at the same time accommodate these different views that you talk about. Right, you're going to have to speak of it in terms of governance. You're going to have to present it as part of an ongoing business machine process. At the same time, it's really driven by technical choices, and there are things in terms of technical choices. There are things you should do before other choices, right? The sort of foundational activities and so forth. And so, again, there's no one structure that fits every case, and so I think we've navigated that pretty well to make, again, a understandable thing, but also different ways to apply. Now, Valecia, I'll share something with our audience they may not know. So you spent a bit of time in our CISO office, and one of the few that's kind of worked from sort of the deep geekery of the watch floor to the suite up top, and look at governance and compliance and things like that, and then kind of back into the controls team. And so any perspective there that you can offer, because you have really an unusual a breadth of experience for someone for your time in the industry.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So when I came from forensics to best practices, I actually wasn't familiar with a lot of different frameworks at the time. And so I learned kind of, the whole game with all the frameworks and what, compliance versus security, but I didn't really have that hands-on, like, dig deeper into the weeds. And I am definitely a dig deeper into the weeds type of person. Charity's laughing at me. If I can't get the dirt, it's not working for me. So anyways, but going back to or kind of not back, but moving into the CISO office really helped me to understand what people struggle with when they implement these frameworks. And it really gave me a new appreciation for what they go through. It's more like, let's see, my old boss used to use the phrase herding cats, right? It really is, because you have to make sure that everyone sort of harmonizes on the same note in order to get the control right. And it takes not just one person, right, from the auditor's lens, it takes the control owner, the control operator, other stakeholders, and you really need to have everything in sync in order for that control or program, rather, to work. And a lot of the times, like when I would go and design or help design the controls, a lot of it was me relying on the control owner to tell me how they did it, right? And then I would learn, and then I would absorb that, and then come back with suggestions. And sometimes we would change the way we did it, and sometimes it'd be like, nope, this isn't the way it should be done. It should be done this way. And it was more of a two-way conversation, I guess is my point. It was not one-sided. It wasn't just the security team saying, like, you must do this because this is what they say. It's, hey, we do it this way. Well, the auditor's asking for this, the external auditor. Well, let's figure out how we can kind of have a happy medium to come to.
I was going to say too, along that line, but and Valecia and I've had this conversation many times. I think you and I, Tony, have as well. There's a certain element of subjectivity that comes into audit as well, right? And so that's one thing that I experienced as a practitioner. What is the auditor going to look for? How am I going to provide this evidence? And what I love about controls, and what to me sets us apart, right, at CIS, is that prescriptive nature of the one ask per safeguard. Therefore, in my opinion, making audits and those discussions with control owners, control statements, a lot easier.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that phrase. I think we started using that maybe for version 6 or 7, somewhere in that range. But that's a deliberate design choice. Right? We talked about multiple ways to frame it. And I remember that giving that guidance to the team. It was, we're not going to write a narrative paragraph and let people guess or analyze, are they asking for one thing or 4 things? And for the audience, that one ask, one ASK per safeguard, meant we tried to have the discipline to say, for the lowest level of recommendation, we go out of our way to only ask for one thing. And it sounds simple, but it actually takes quite a bit of discipline. And it was done with an eye towards exactly what you both just described, which is the ongoing conversation. So if you leave it as a big narrative, everyone gets to interpret it the way they want, then you're kind of stuck forever in negotiation. If you say, I asked for one thing, then you can say, well, is that thing automatable? Is there a test for it? Is there a metric I can pull from the system that would reinforce, that would provide evidence I've achieved it? Can I assign a human being to it? Is there a tool that I can use? And it allows you, and I think we've used this phrase before, right? We're not writing prose, we're starting the workflow. So by discipline up front, you make the rest of the conversation easier. You can better align with business processes, with tools, with who's accountable and responsible. And that ongoing conversation is really an important part of this. And it's a key, I think, to a lot of the implementation issues. And, Valecia, you went at length about that conversation. So let me follow up with that one, Valecia, because you said, so what you described, right, the herding cat stuff, which I think is exactly right. And by the way, cats do not want to be herded into a straight line. I can speak from experience here in our household. So at the same time, you got to get them moving. And that is not a technical skill, right? That is a communication skill. That is a let's see the common good skill. And so it's one of the, I think, most underrated factors or attributes that allow a program to be successful. So I know you each have a couple of favorites. So what's another favorite of yours, Valecia? What other underrated thing or sort of key to success would you recommend to the listener today?
Yeah, I would say communication, right? And a big part of this is when we develop controls, not the CIS controls, right? When I was in ISO, just any control in general we had to implement. The biggest thing is that people wanted to know why. They didn't want to just know how, they wanted to know why. And I think it's a valid question, right? Like if I told my 6-year-old to do something, then she would ask, why? Why do you want me to do that? Well, and I explain it, and she probably still wouldn't do it. But the point being, is that it's important to understand why you're doing something, and it actually gets more buy-in when you understand that. Because otherwise, you're just being told a command and control, and no one likes to just be told what to do and just do it and fall in order. And honestly, that's how change happens, right? Is you tell somebody what you're trying to achieve, the why, and then they're like, oh, okay, well, what if we did this? Or, that's how innovation happens in general. And so I think that's the biggest piece for me. And then the other one would be accountability. So when something fails, holding people accountable, because there's many times where you get it's a difficult, very delicate position to be an auditor, that you don't have any direct reports necessarily that you're telling people what to do or asking them to do it. And it sometimes can get weird. Like you said, it's more of a soft skill than it is any kind of technical skill. And having the accountability and making sure you kind of hold strong to that will help in the long run, because if you don't hold people accountable and things start to fall through the cracks, then you look 2, 3, 4 years down the road and all of a sudden you have a security program, but it's sort of like kind of crumbling on the foundation. And that's not anything anyone wants, right? So just the other thing too is like staffing is a big issue in addition to budget. So with the staffing piece is like making sure that you have a control owner, and that even if you have somebody who's an operator that's providing evidence or managing the control, pseudo managing it, making sure the control owner is the one that's held accountable. And I know it kind of sounds harsh, but that is the person that should be answering back, right? Not the intern, not the person that's like not going to potentially be there in 4 months. You need somebody who sort of like knows how the control should operate and be confident in that. So
no, and that accountability, and it's easy to say, but again, if you're not crisp about what you're trying to solve and what your expectation is, then it's hard to hold people accountable, right? So all the things that we have built are with that end in mind. You want clarity of. I remember I grew up in the Defense Department, and it was, and I remember having this conversation with people who have stars on their shoulder, and we need to find the person that failed to put the patch in and hold them accountable. Right? This is a command issue. That's the term, and we may need to make an example of them. Okay, sir. That person is a 18-year-old tech school graduate. And you, the enterprise, have put your fate in the hands of the lowest paid, least trained, least equipped person in your workforce. You don't have bad people. You have bad strategy. right? So we're not crisp about what we're trying to achieve. So we kind of throw it to somebody to take the fall is what it comes down to. And I think that's, that's just bad management overall. And so that clarity of purpose helps drive the accountability. And I think that's a really key part. The other thing, and you didn't say it, but I know you intend it, because you've seen this from both sides. This communication is a two-way path. And so by talking about the problem you're trying to solve, you're leaving open the chance for dialogue. I hear you, Ms. Auditor, and I recognize that problem. Let me talk to you about, we have a different way to solve that problem. And that might be a good argument that says the nature of our enterprise, its architecture, the tools and things we put in place, we're aware of that problem and we are actively managing it. If you come in thinking the only way to solve this problem is the way that's in the paper over here, then you're stuck forever in this loop, right? And people now they don't believe you anymore. So having that open mind, and I had exactly that conversation around version 5 and 6 with vendors, because vendors would show up all the time. Oh, we like what you're doing, but you don't need that stuff. You just need to buy our magic widgets over here. Okay, well, tell me why. But there were at least a couple of vendors that said, I think I know what problem you're trying to solve with that control. Let me explain to you why I think that problem no longer matters for people that use our technology this way. And at least 2 vendors swayed me, and I wound up rewriting controls to accommodate a different way to solve the problem. I had something in my mind, or the collective of the folks that wrote it. And I thought, you know what? They do have a new idea. And so that communication is a two-way thing, right? So you've opened that dialogue by saying, here's the problem. Here's what is implied as the solution. But it gives you a chance to hear something different. And as you say, you get to learn a lot, I think, by seeing how people make those choices. So for Charity, you're not off the hook. What are some key factors for you, though? Some advice you would offer to the audience here about either underappreciated or important things for them to consider as they look at their implementation.
Who knew the subject around communication of the why versus the how was going to be so popular today? Yeah, I have a pile-on story with that too.
Please.
Several many years ago, I was going through a really large merger and acquisition to double the size of the institution that I was in. So as you can imagine, the governance programs are coming together. I'm trying to communicate to executive leadership why it's so important to have the program, why it's so important to have policies and measurement. And I'm thinking that I'm doing that. And one of our executive leaders that I respected very much, pulled me aside and he was like, Charity, I've worked with you for a long time. I know that you know what you're talking about, but you are not explaining the why versus the how. You need to, really reevaluate your communication, because I think you're making the assumptions, that, maybe somebody that's less technical or less security minded is having these conversations with you and it's not landing. And so I really did, I had been doing this for many, many years and had to really go back and think about that why versus how communication and how I was going to communicate, what we were doing essentially. And it really made me think, because that's an evolution of things as well, being able to fill that gap as practitioners in having those conversations and being able to put things into a different lens, being able to put risk mitigation and defense posture into a lens that would enable business objectives can go a long way, right? I worked in disaster recovery for a long time and nobody wanted to talk about incident response until there was an actual incident. So, using data-driven research, and I know we've talked about the community defense model already, but, utilizing that research and that, the resources and the data that you can to have those conversations is so incredibly powerful. So, secondly, I would say continuous improvement. Threats and technologies alike are continuously evolving, and demonstrating that improvement over time shows a commitment and drive to successful execution.
Yeah, and a shameless plug for some other work that we've done at CIS, the reasonable cybersecurity work, right? Which we attempt to bridge the gap between the good intentions of technology, security, but also public policy and the legal system. And I think one of the lessons that we try to pull together there, right? Security, you don't reach some mythical state. I am secure and I'm done. That's not realistic. So security is always some set of machinery that's running. And you need to know, the machine is well defined. There is a target, right? That when I get to the point where I can manage risk, but I also want to know where I am and what's my roadmap to make progress. And it turns out that your ability to express that, to describe that, to have a rationale for that is incredibly important, both to convince your boss that you know what you're doing, but also to convince an auditor, a regulator, and others that, oh, these folks, they do have a plan. They've looked at their risks, they've made choices, they've made investments. There's no done, and they know where they are. And I have a good sense, high confidence that they have a plan for the next 6 months. That's a pretty strong position, it turns out, right? When you're talking to a regulator, auditor, boss, a business partner, supply chain friend, et cetera, that I think is much more realistic in today's world. That it's so complicated. So much is changing. And so you're not talking about I'm done. You're talking about here's where I am. I have intelligently managed risk to the best of my ability. There is data that shows that this is a prudent and responsible path here. And you've heard me say before, right? And by the way, nobody wants to be the lonely antelope at the edge of the cyber herd, right? So if you're the 2 Sigma outlier, everybody else is investing with some reasonable product, and you're like just making stuff up as you go. That's a bad place to be if the boss figures that out and the auditor figures that out, the regulator figures it out. So there we are. But so all of that kind of stuff. Let's come back now to the ecosystem. So we've talked a lot about we started with the ecosystem, our thinking. And we shared that. The good news is we have so much content now, we had to rethink the way we present it to you so you can better understand and line it up against what an enterprise owner or security officer is trying to do. Let's come back to some of the other products and services, though, that we've created in the ecosystem. Any favorites for you, Valecia? So you've been involved directly with some of them, and some of them you are just, you've observed or used in other roles. But the things that we have made available, sometimes because the market isn't mature or because we try to provide it for those who don't have other resources.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I don't know all of them. No.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
let me rewind quick. So I think one of my favorite things, not as far as a specific tool or paper, my favorite project in the last year and a half was to reorganize our website for the controls, for the resources that we have. And so I think it's worth mentioning because there are so many things that we have, and I had organized them into buckets, essentially, right? So environment-specific guidance, things like mobile, IoT, ICS guides, assessing and measuring, implementation, minimizing your threats, right? CDM type of stuff. So I think that's part of it, right? Is to make sure that the content you're presenting, no matter if it's 20 pieces of content or 500, is organized in a way where people can actually understand it and know what they need to look for. But as far as, what I think is my favorite, I would say CDM, which sounds biased because that's the one that I at least 2.0 that I had done, but, and now we're working on 3.0. But I think it really sort of puts, as Charity likes to say, teeth or grit into what you're doing, right? Because it's the why factor. And it's important, right? MITRE sort of rules the world with the threat landscape. And obviously we have a controls framework, and marry the two together. And it's just like this beautiful relationship that can flourish as far as what, like the stories it can tell, right? And I think that's a really important thing or powerful thing to do.
No, I think it was it was groundbreaking work, years ago, and it's groundbreaking work today. There's not a lot of people plowing behind us either, but but the idea is so incredibly important, which is this, you can't defend against this sort of big giant fog wave of mystery attacks and 10-foot tall nation state adversaries. You have to narrow down to say, what do I really care about? What are the classes of attacks? Can I represent those classes in a powerful, uniform way? The work of MITRE and the attack framework and all these kinds of things. And then don't just make recommendations because 5 grumpy people got in a room and argued and wrote them down, but assess the value of individual recommendations based upon their ability to provide some positive management value against specific items of the classes of attacks we care about. I said that a little backwards, but you know the idea. And the idea is that that level of understanding has been missing in the industry. And I think it's still largely missing. There's a sort of magical, we need to buy all this technology. If you just read the right threat feed, if you just bought the right tool, well, if you don't have any way to assess the value of individual things against things that are going to cause you harm, that are part of the attack framework, for example, then you really don't know what value you're going to get. And you can't then assess things like alternate strategies. If I take, what's the smallest number of things I can do to give me value against this set of attacks I care about? Those are really foundational economic business questions that have a huge technical component. And so you have to meet those two in the middle. So, but great plug on the website, by the way. I'd forgotten about that. I think that's wonderful. Again, that was a rethinking this so that when people come, it's much clearer. They have a sense, they know what problems they're trying to solve. You're just trying to get them down the right path without having to read everything. And I think that's a great idea. And CDM is one of my favorites too, as you know, Valecia. So I appreciate that. Yeah. All right, Charity, but I need a different favorite or two from you. What else do you like?
I mean, CDM is my favorite too.
Okay. We found a common thing.
Only because it's like I said, not having an ecosystem to work with when I was on that side of the house as a practitioner, and really seeing that level of research. And, I always start out my controls overview presentations, no matter where I am, here locally or across the US, right? Or I'm giving a webinar. I'll start with the overview of the controls, and I'm like, and they're prioritized, prescriptive, and backed by data. And when I say backed by data, you guys can hold me accountable to that. And so that's what I mean. I'm setting it up for CDM because it's just such a wonderful body of research that continues to evolve. We're working on CDM 3.0 right now, and so hopefully we'll have a follow-up podcast on that. But yeah, we started to see that this is just an iterative, continuous process. There's no reason for us to, pause and then wait for threat intel reports, right? It's such deep research and requires so much analyses. Valecia and Sarah Day on the team could tell you that we've started moving into a continuous process for that, to continue to, get lessons learned, even that didn't make it into the report that, we want to talk about or have follow-ups on. So we're already thinking about CDM 3.1 and 3.0 is not even released yet.
Yeah, and I was going to add one other tool that I think is probably like a hidden gem is the Controls Assessment Specification, which is a tool that I recently took over when I came back to the controls team after working in ISO. And the Controls Assessment Specification is sort of like this really grassroots type of project that sort of blossomed over the last few years. And I hope I'm able to continually evolve that as Controls version 9 comes out and all of the other lovely content that goes with it. But really, that is about kind of how you're able to measure the implementation of a control. And to me, I'm all about the math, right? So anything that I can go and put a number behind or actually have a concrete outcome is super important because, and Charity mentioned this, and Tony, you might have too, is that, and this is sort of like, I love to say this, you have 5 auditors in the room and you say, give me evidence for control X. And all of those 5 auditors are going to have 5 different opinions on what actually constitutes as complete, which is a problem in and of itself, right? And that gets really weird with like external auditors. But anyways, the point being is that the more clear you can be when you implement a control, the better. Right.
I'm really glad you brought that up because that was going to be my favorite, by the way, with all respect to CDM, which obviously I'm a huge fan of. But the Controls Assessment Specification, it came out of those discussions for exactly that reason, Valecia, this sort of rampant subjectivity around this. And the idea was to look at, the one ask per safeguard. One of the things you ask about each one of those safeguards is it automatable? Does it lend itself to automation? Are there system artifacts I could pull, like register keys, for example, that would tell me I'm on the right path, I've implemented this? And to separate that from the more, and there are things that are going to be more subjective. Do you have an incident response plan? And what kind of properties should it have? That doesn't lend itself to machine readability. But when you mix them all together, then you get this, it's not clear. If you say these I can associate with machine artifacts, and we actually brought in academics to study that for a version of the control so we could generate the specification, then you could create a spec. You could say this subset of the controls lends itself to automation. We're going to define what those look like. We're going to publish that so vendors can build tools to take that part of it and put it on the side to say, okay, these you don't have to, read a big document. You run a tool, you get artifacts. Others we handle differently, and that was a really important part of it. Again, it was really designed to facilitate that conversation. You both have spoken about it several times, right, between the overseer, auditor, boss, regulator, whoever, and the implementer and everybody in between. And I think that's a great part of it. Let me just, I'll throw a shameless plug out to some of our other parts of the Center for Internet Security's team, the security benchmarks and the hardened images. They are, they're embedded deeply into the controls, and they are, the company was founded on the benchmarks, the sort of low level, how do I take a piece of IT and configure it for best security effect? And they're, that is obviously just a key part of the controls, which operate at the level of how do I put all this together? How do I manage it? How do I govern it? How do I organize my defenses? So all those pieces were meant to be part of this larger whole and part of the ecosystem, at least by extension. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the controls, the ecosystem, individual tools, the advice for the machinery of both implementation and also decision making and ongoing presentation, right? Describing to others what you have done in order to facilitate the communications. So I think it's a great start for folks who are interested. Valecia, you talked about our updated web presence. It's a great place for people to get started. One of the things I think people really appreciate, and thank you guys for coming on here, is the accessibility of CIS in general, but also of the controls team, right? We're looking at about a third or a quarter of the entire team right now on the screen. Well, you're not on the screen, but you know what I mean? That is, people who want to be in the conversation to learn more can reach out to the Center for Internet Security, or they can be on a workbench, part of our ongoing discussion community about best practices, and really be involved in this directly, right? We're not a big mystery think tank. We're not off, in some giant plush building somewhere, enjoying the facilities and, handing down information from on high. We're part of the community. And, and you can also state, I think pretty authoritatively, Valecia, it's from the time you spent with our CISO's office, right? As we say at CIS, we drink our own champagne. We use our own products, and which gives us both experience, but also gives us confidence at CIS that we're managing responsibly the security that we're responsible for. So last chance here. Any last thought that you would care to leave with the audience? Anything to reinforce or to point out for another day, another topic, another episode? Valecia, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I would say at the end of the day, it's a team effort, right? It's not just the security and the IT teams, which I often hear. It's HR, it's developers, it's legal, finance, procurement. It's the whole company. The programs fail when they're managed in isolation without any sort of input from the other players. And I would also say too that, your technology changes, your business objectives change over time. So as those change, so will your controls program or your security programs. They're not going to stay stagnant, and they shouldn't stay stagnant. But the other thing too, going back to team effort, as Sean likes to say, security is everyone's responsibility. And I really, truly believe that, because it really does take a village.
Very good. Charity, last thought from you?
Yes, absolutely. So we've talked a lot about implementation and measurement and a little bit about assessment. So I wanted to just say a couple of words about CIS Controls Accreditation Program. So we stood this up about 2 years ago to solve for the question, does CIS recommend anyone to do assessments against controls or an audit or provide implementation guidance? And so if you'd asked me that 2 years ago, I would have said no. But luckily today I can say yes. So essentially this program program is designed for assessors, so your consultancies, auditors, MSPs, any organization that wants to have an official stamp of approval from CIS to conduct assessments on our behalf. So this program from a back office perspective is managed by another one of our nonprofit globally recognized partners, which is Crest, who provides quite the sporty assessment, if you'll remember that from a couple of podcasts ago with Lawrence Cruciano, right? To ensure that they're able to provide an accurate and valuable assessment around the CIS controls. So this is, in two parts. If you are an organization that wants to be assessed, you can visit our website that has all of the controls accredited companies up. Corporate Infotech is one, IT Productivity, Palo Alto, just to name a few. And then if you are wanting to achieve that accreditation award, as I call it, as an organization, and extend that value to your customers as an MSP or a consultant, do check that out as well.
No, that's a great lead, and part of our strategy to make our content available in lots of different ways, right? Through things that we provide, but also through the marketplace, and the vendors you mentioned, the program. We go way out of our way. What's the term, right? We convey confidence in a connected world, right? So if you get from one of the vendors that we work with, you're getting confidence that it represents our content accurately, correctly, and that we have an ongoing relationship with them. And it's that's about scale. These are not giant money makers. These are to get our value out there at scale in the way that you want it. And again, some people will take our tools or open source, and some prefer to work through the marketplace, and that's all great. So thank you both for your time. There's always something to talk about the controls, and I suspect over the next year, there's going to be even more to talk about the future of the controls and what comes out in the next generation of it. So yeah, I can't wait for that topic, and we'll definitely have you back on. And to our audience, thank you again for your time and attention. We really appreciate everything that you do, and do our best to bring some clarity to some of the tough topics that are out there in cybersecurity. Always open to your feedback. Please subscribe to the podcast in the usual ways, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode. Thank you all very much. Thank you for listening to the podcast today.
The thoughts and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect those of CIS.
Tune in on Wednesdays for a new episode. And in the meantime, visit our website at cisecurity.org.
Together, we'll continue our efforts of creating confidence in the connected world.